Hi there, I'm Renelle Mason, and this is Ronnie Watches Movies. So, this one is for my brother in law who wanted me to do a Lord of the Rings video, which this isn't, but I will be mentioning them in comparison with The Hobbit, so there you go. Since I've started getting into watching movie channels on YouTube in the last couple of years, I've seen a lot of videos of people just completely trashing the Hobbit movies. And while I don't think that these movies were as good as The Lord of the Rings, I do think that people are being a little harder on them than they deserve. But before we get into that, this is your reminder to like this video if you enjoy it, leave me a comment down below, and consider subscribing if you like this kind of content. I officially hit 10 subscribers on my last video, which was super exciting for me, so I guess the next goal is 15. So yeah, hit subscribe and help me get to 15 subscribers. With all that out of the way, let's talk about the Hobbit movies. I ditched my glasses because the reflection from the window was bugging me. So let me just start by saying that I love The Hobbit. It is my favorite book. I have reread it so many times, but as much as I love the Lord of the Rings movies, I have never actually finished the books. I think I had like 8 pages left to go in the last Lord of the Rings books, and I just couldn't bring myself to finish it. I put it down one day and just never picked it back up again, and that was probably like 12, 13 years ago. But even though I never finished the books, I grew up completely obsessed with the Lord of the Rings movies. I had The Two Towers on VHS. It was the only one I owned for a long time, and I used to just watch it over and over again, and I drove my family nuts. What I am getting at is that The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings books are very, very different. The Hobbit is a much easier read. It's fun and silly and wonderful, and as much as I love the Lord of the Rings movies, the books are a real slog. They are so detail heavy, single scenes seem to go on forever with nothing really happening. To be fair, I haven't tried rereading them now that I'm a bit older, but basically I remember being bored out of my mind. So I feel like when people complain about the Hobbit movies and how they hold up to the Lord of the Rings, they don't really realize the source material that the movies were working with and how different the vibes were. Now, taking a look at the movies, I'm going to go through some common complaints that I have come across in my YouTube browsings and kind of break down why I think they're unwarranted. Now, if you're comparing the Hobbit movies to Lord of the Rings movies without factoring in the books, I can understand this complaint to an extent. I watched this video by the Critical Drinker, who I'm a big fan of, and in it he made a point about Gimli from The Lord of the Rings and how he might seem a bit silly at times, and the movie often pokes fun at his expense.
Nobody tosses a dwarf! Not the beard!
But that we are still able to take him seriously as a character. And I agree, except for the fact that he was making this point to say that the dwarves in the Hobbit movies were not to be taken seriously at all. Now, I think one thing the drinker may have overlooked here is the quantity of dwarves that we are dealing with. In The Lord of the Rings, Gimli is surrounded by elves and men and other mythical creatures that are all a bit more serious than he is, except for maybe the hobbits. Whereas in the Hobbit movies, we are solely focused on 13 dwarves and one hobbit, and occasionally a wizard. But the point is that a movie focused on that many hobbits, on that many dwarves, without the more serious characters to balance them out, is going to have a very different tone. And while yes, these characters can often behave in silly ways and find themselves in silly situations, I honestly can't understand how anyone can watch these movies and think that the dwarves don't have any depth beyond that. These characters are brave and loyal and resilient. They take pride in their culture and they value their friendship. I feel like the people who choose not to see this are just so upset that these movies weren't more like The Lord of the Rings that they just can't look past the silly nature of the dwarves and see the heart beneath. Coming at you again here, drinker. There is so much singing in the books. So much singing. The movies were way light in comparison. Now, this one really bugs me. These movies have so much heart. They also just happen to have a lot of lighthearted jokes and whimsy as well. One scene that always gets to me is when all of the dwarves are stuck in a tree and Thorin is about to be killed by the White Orc, and Bilbo runs to defend him even though he doesn't stand a chance. He doesn't have a clue what he's doing, but he tries anyway because he's got heart. And yes, while these movies might be much sillier than The Lord of the Rings, they are filled with plenty of moments like this that are just brimming with heart. Okay, now I'm going to touch on some of the complaints that I think are more warranted here. I don't have a defense for this. These movies are way too long. Apparently, they were originally meant to be a duology, which I think would have much better suited the source material. In trying to stretch this 320-page book into 3 movies, each well over 2 hours long, they had to add in a lot of filler, involving many unnecessary storylines and the existence of characters original to the movies that weren't really needed. Let's take a look at Tariel. What is her point in this story? Well, to be a love interest to one of the dwarves, of course. Is this love interest beneficial or necessary to the plot in any way? No, not really. Let's take a look at Legolas. What is his point in the story? Well, to get fans of The Lord of the Rings excited to see one of their favorite characters again. Was he beneficial or necessary to the plot in any way? No, not really. Now, I admit that I am one of those people that was actually really excited to see Legolas in the Hobbit movies. He is one of my favorite characters from The Lord of the Rings, and it was super cool to see him pop up unexpectedly in The Hobbit because he wasn't in the book. However, I don't think it was necessarily a smart choice. Bringing this character into the movies just adds another storyline to follow that we really didn't need, and they could have really tightened up the script and cut down the runtime if they had just left him out. And let's be honest, trying to get a 34-year-old Orlando Bloom to look like he did when he was 22 just didn't work. Something about him looks very off in these movies. So yeah, no defense from me here. I think these movies are way too long, and they really would have benefited from just sticking with the original duology. I don't disagree with this one. I do think that a lot of these movies look really great, but they are missing out on that feeling of realness that you get in The Lord of the Rings because of the practical effects. Now, the Hobbits have some really beautiful imagery, but they do have that feeling of fakeness. And for some people, that isn't a problem. For example, my husband actually prefers these movies to The Lord of the Rings because they're newer and they look newer. Personally, I think they took it a little bit too far. It works really well in some areas, and in other areas, I think they could have benefited from holding back a bit and going a little bit more old school. For example, I think that Smaug looked incredible, but the orcs look better in The Lord of the Rings. When it comes to the scenery, I'm a bit torn. They did get some really great shots with a green screen that you just can't find on location. But like I said, you do just have that kind of feeling of fakeness from it. It doesn't have that living, breathing feeling that you get when something is filmed on location. Yeah, so this one's a bit of a hit or miss for me. For some people, like my husband, they really like that crisp new feel that you get from a green screen and special effects. And for others, we prefer things a bit more natural. I don't hate all the CGI in these movies. Overall, I still think they look pretty good, but they definitely could have pulled it back a little bit. Something these movies are guilty of is putting their characters into these totally insane situations that no one could survive and then having them come out the other side totally unscathed. Prime example being this. Now, I can see both sides of this. On the one hand, this is supposed to be a more lighthearted series than The Lord of the Rings, and putting the characters into these kinds of situations does help add to the whimsy of the dwarves. Watching them go through these kinds of things is fun and silly, and so in that aspect, the scenes are serving their purpose. But then there's the other side, where if you are constantly putting your characters into dangerous situations that are treated like jokes, then it can be pretty hard to take the danger seriously. In these types of scenes, we are never really worried about the dwarves' safety. We're never concerned that one of them might not make it out because the whole scenario is just too silly. It makes the characters seem indestructible. Until the last movie, where they just completely destroy our trust in the indestructibility of the characters and just start offing main characters. So this is a tough one. On the one hand, I do really enjoy these kind of fun action sequences, but on the other hand, it does remove any kind of real sense of danger for the characters. Given the source material and the general tone that I think they were going for here, I'm going to say that I don't think this is a terrible offense, but I can definitely see where the complaint is coming from, especially in comparison with the Lord of the Rings movies. Now, I understand why people compare these movies to The Lord of the Rings. It really only makes sense. But at the same time, the books are so different that it just doesn't really seem fair to compare them. I can understand how people who haven't read the books could be disappointed if you're going in expecting The Lord of the Rings and instead you got this. But if we are just looking at the films on their own merits, I think there's a lot to appreciate here. Martin Freeman and Richard Armitage really did give amazing performances here. I think they really were the perfect casting choices, and they did such a wonderful job bringing these characters to life. I can't imagine the roles of Bilbo and Thorin being played by anyone else. They really were the standout performances of these films for me. The movie may have taken some liberties with the story by adding some new plot lines, but honestly, I think it was pretty faithful adaptation tonally. The dwarves are lighthearted and fun to watch, while still holding true to the values of The Lord of the Rings, like friendship, loyalty, bravery, and compassion. These movies are not flawless, but they are entertaining, and I really enjoy the heart of these films. Ultimately, if it weren't for their connection to one of the greatest film series of all time, I think they would have been received a lot better. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Thanks for stopping by. Please give this video a like if you made it to the end. Leave me a comment down below letting me know what you thought of the Hobbit movies. And hit that subscribe button if you love movies as much as I do.